back. Welcome back, everybody. Now we start our segment on inclusive innovation. And we're going to kick that off with some remarks on the topic by Lady Idos, Deputy Director for the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility at the Department of Energy.
Hi, I'm Lady Idos, the Deputy Director for the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility at the U.S. Department of Energy. As many of you know, providing global solutions for energy and climate justice requires input from our frontline communities who are the most impacted. This includes understanding the underlying problems and root causes, including barriers that are inequitable. This is one of the reasons why equity and accessibility to STEM opportunities are so critical to making a real impact in tackling energy and climate challenges. Since 2015, the DOE LEEP nodes have been innovating solutions to problems that impact people around the world. For many frontline communities, energy, climate, and economic inequity, injustice, and insecurity are significant barriers to accessing higher education and long-term personal and community well-being. Removing these barriers is the work of creating real equity. We know that the value proposition for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, or DEI&A, is evident. And some of the most innovative ideas derive directly from those whose lived experiences provide the insight we need to create a better future. Here at the DOE and the national laboratories, we know that advancing DEI&A is not only a business imperative, but one of national and global consequence. For far too long, communities of color, the LGBTQ+ or SGM community, people with disabilities or accessibility needs, and other frontline communities have remained underrepresented, underserved, and overburdened. This is the time to empower these voices, to be proactive, and to listen to the diversity of ideas and experiences. So how do we do this? For one, we can leverage the wisdom of our affinity groups, such as employee resource groups, or ERGs, to provide a voice and represent the needs of their own communities. Also, impact requires bold thinking outside the box. For example, how do we create multidisciplinary teams that include community stakeholders? How do we evaluate the industry experience with PhD equivalent knowledge? Or how do we meaningfully engage our communities with sustainability in mind for long-term partnerships? These complex issues will require our continued focus and diligence. Continued work in community outreach will also generate more interest in STEM careers and enable the growth of diverse talent pathways for STEM and clean energy jobs. In closing, I'd like to acknowledge all of you who continue to work towards advancing DEI&A. We know that this work, including energy justice, must include the voices of all of our communities. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the work that you do and for your commitment to creating a more just and equitable future.
Thanks, Lady, for your perspectives on DEI&A as it relates to startups. And I can tell you here at CRI, the motivation for our Seed intern program really comes from the roots of everything that you just talked about. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Megan Clifford, Associate Laboratory Director for the Science and Technology Partnerships and Outreach Directorate at Argonne, who will talk about Argonne's perspective on DEI and then introduce our moderator for our Inclusive Innovation panel. Megan.
Thanks, John. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Megan Clifford. As John mentioned, I'm the Associate Laboratory Director for Science and Technology Partnerships and Outreach at Argonne National Lab. It's my pleasure to be here today and to have the opportunity to talk a bit about inclusive innovation. In a moment, we're going to hear from a panel on the topic featuring experts who are doing wonderful work on this front. Inclusive innovation is to enable the active participation of underrepresented and under-resourced populations to contribute to and benefit from new investments in scientific research and commercialization. At Argonne, we aim to do this by using science and technology to develop solutions to community challenges, by developing and sourcing talent from underrepresented populations in STEM and disinvested communities, and by investing in people by strengthening local STEM education programming from kindergarten to career. Argonne deepened its commitment to inclusive innovation in 2019 when, with the support of the Department of Energy and the University of Chicago, it launched Argonne in Chicago as a vehicle to build institutional connections with communities, organizations, and people who are underrepresented in innovation and economic growth. This commitment is manifested in a physical presence, including a collaboration space here at Hyde Park Innovation District on the city's south side. This is where we're broadcasting from today. On a programmatic level, CRI is a perfect example of putting inclusive innovation into practice. The CRI program is intentional in its outreach and recruitment of diverse innovators. 50% of CRI founders are from underrepresented groups in the sciences, 31% are women. CRI has also established the SEED internship program, which we've heard a lot about today, and it really empowers Chicago college students from under-resourced communities to pursue and excel in STEM careers. Those are a few examples of how Argonne is leaning into this, and I look forward to hearing the panel discussion on this topic. The moderator for our discussion today is Shalonda Baker. Shalonda is the Director of the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity at the U.S. Department of Energy. Prior to her appointment, she was a professor of law, public policy, and urban affairs at Northeastern University. She was the co-founder and co-director of the Initiative for Energy Justice, which provides technical law and policy support to communities on the front lines of climate change. She has also served this country as an Air Force officer. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Shalonda Baker.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I know we have folks coming on the stage, so I want to give them an opportunity to join us. We are truly doing the hybrid thing today. So I am the director of the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity. I'm so proud to count Deputy Director Lady Idos as a member of my team. And sorry, Lawrence Berkeley, we did steal her from you for a little while. And I also lead equity writ large across the agency. I am absolutely delighted to be the moderator for today's panel. We have an exciting lineup ahead of us. And I always like to shake things up because that's what I do. So we have Dr. Pedro Pizarro, who's a president and chief executive officer at Edison International. And so let's give him a round of applause. We also, okay, great. Thank you. We also have Dr. Khalid Alam, who's the founder and CEO of StimLoop. Great. And we have Dr. Rachel Slaybaugh, who is at the Deep Tech Climate, part of Deep Tech Climate Tech Investor. And then we have a member of our own DOE community, and I'm saying that quite broadly, Kelly Johnson, who's a Talent and Diversity Outreach Program Manager at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Great. So I'm going to start, and I want to give our panelists an opportunity to kind of speak off the cuff a bit. I'm going to start by having each panelist introduce themselves and share their superpower in this inclusive innovation space. So if you could lead by talking about who you are and where you came from and how you came to the work, but then also saying what you found to be your superpower in this space. And I know all of you are creative people. All of you are superheroes in your own realm. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say. And so I'll start with Dr. Pizarro. So again, please share with the audience who you are, how you came to the work, and then what your superpower is in the inclusive innovation space.
Well, thanks, Shalonda. I don't know about the superpower thing, and please call me Pedro, not Dr. Pizarro. But great to be here. And I would say the superpower is the community around us. You look at our company, Edison International. We have Southern California Edison, a utility that serves 15 million residents in about 40% of California. And we have Edison Energy, which is providing services to large corporates around the world. And really, the superpower is having people who come at problems from different angles, different perspectives, because they have different lived experiences. So it starts with our board. 8 out of the 11 of us are diverse in one way or another: gender, race, ethnic orientation, LGBTQ preference. That translates through to our executives. That translates through to our employees, our teammates. And then, when we're doing things like setting up programs like the Charge Ready program that the utility launched last year, to spend a bit over $400 million to put out 38,000 chargers in our communities. That program from its inception was helped to be designed by or with input from community groups, from local organizations, representing diverse perspectives. And so it's no surprise that half of that money is going to help low-income and disadvantaged communities. So the superpowers, the folks around us.
That's excellent, Pedro. And I think it sounds like you do have a superpower. And I think that is building teams, building diverse teams. And that is not something that everyone does well. So we'll circle back to you and pick your brain a little bit more as we go on in the program. I want to turn to Dr. Alam. If you could please share with the audience kind of how you came into this work. And if you also have a superpower to share, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Khalid Alam. I'm the founder and CEO of STEMloop. We are an early stage startup building highly accurate and scalable sensing technologies using synthetic biology. Came to this work, of course, as an innovator in the third cohort of the Chain Reaction Innovations program. The superpower question is a tough one. I'm actually trying to think in real time what my answer might be. But I have to put one out there. It's not having a huge ego, right? So I want to be the dumbest person in the room. I want to make sure that I have a really diverse team around me and that they're all, equipped and resourced to innovate. And so that would be my answer in terms of superpower.
I love it. I love it. See, I had to keep people on their toes, but Dr. Slabaugh has had the advantage of listening to the first two responses. So I won't throw you off in any way, but please do introduce yourself, tell a little bit about how you came to the work, and then again, share your superpower.
Yeah, so hi, I'm a principal at DCVC. We are a deep tech venture firm, and my background, I've only been at DCVC for about 6 months. I was a professor at Berkeley for the last 8 years, and while I was there, I was a program director at ARPA-E, various other things along the way. I spent last year doing what Tom Kerstetter is doing now, so I ran Cyclotron Road. And so all along that path, figuring out how to build diverse pipelines in STEM and in innovation has been really important to me. And so it's just sort of been, how do I build my research group? How do I find companies to fund from ARPA-E? How do we recruit companies into Cyclotron Road? And now in venture, how do we find diverse founders? And how do we support our companies to build diversity into their companies? And that's really the focus. And I would say, my superpower has been trying to create an environment where people feel safe, heard, and valued. And I've found that it's easier to recruit more diverse folks when the environment feels safe, when they feel like they're heard, and when they feel like they're valued, no matter who they are or where they came from.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And last but not least, I'll turn to my DOE colleague, at least in the lab space, Ms. Johnson. So please do share a little bit about how you came into this work and what you see as your superpower.
Definitely. So with my more than 25 years of HR experience and workforce development and outreach, I support all the diversity outreach at Berkeley Lab So my goal is to really build hiring pathways for marginalized groups here at Berkeley Lab, and that includes individuals with disabilities and veterans and women and underrepresented minorities. And I have a strong passion for this work and enjoy what I do. So I would have to say my superpower would be, strong collaborator with the ability to connect others to join in this effort and identify those people who are just as passionate about it and align them with the right opportunities. So yeah, thanks.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So we're going to have some fun for the next 45 minutes. And I have to say, I'm taking a little bit of moderator's privilege. I typically am on your side. So I'm really excited to be able to ask the questions today. I want to go back to you, Pedro. So in my role as the director of the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity, I am always trying to make sure that we are matching what we do at DOE with the ecosystem. Right. And that the ecosystem of entrepreneurs, of minority businesses, of diverse firms is ready for the opportunities that we are going to be putting out the door at the department. And we're at the very leading edge, I would say, in sort of making sure that our funding announcements are embedding requirements that developers are partnering with diverse suppliers, with diverse partners, creating opportunities for diverse individuals. But how do you do that? Right. So I'm really curious to know from you as a leader in the industry, how you are able to embed equity and embed diversity, equity, inclusion into a company at its very foundation. What are some of the tips that you can offer to the audience thinking about these very things?
Yeah, so I'll give a couple of perspectives on that. One is it really does have to start from the top. And so from our board on through our leadership team, we're really committed to this and invested in it. And frankly, it reflects the communities that we serve. But those are nice words. You actually have to then do stuff that puts it into real action, right? And so, look at programs and look at requirements that we set up internally. As you were talking, Shalonda, I was thinking about the diverse supplier procurement that we have inside our utility. Something like nearly 40% of spend today comes from diverse and small business suppliers. And that's not just about going out and buying from them. By the way, it's several $billion a year. It's not just going out and buying from them, but particularly for something like a regulated utility, there's a part of the company that, or part of the mission that's helping to build the community, right? We've been there for 135 years. We can't choose to move and take our poles and wires with us, right? So we're there for the long run. And so if we want to have a diverse supplier community, we need to invest in it. And we also do that by developing, essentially we have an academy that helps to provide learning opportunities, build the skill set so that that small subcontractor can grow into a bigger subcontractor, and maybe someday they'll be the prime contractor. Well, we help them along the way with the educational tools for that. So that's one angle you made me think of. One other one quickly that I kind of alluded to already, and it's thinking about the variety of programs that we have and what is the need that they need to be addressing. Clearly, our main focus is supporting the clean energy transition, right? It's about getting California to net zero. It's about investing, with other stakeholders and what that'll take. But when you go in and implement that, it's fine to be at the high level goal of net zero. You got to break that down into, well, that means, clean electricity. That means using electricity to electrify cars and electrify buildings. And so then you have to develop programs that are listening to the community, like I mentioned earlier in the example of the charging program I described. Tapping into NGOs, tapping into community organizations, helping them be at the front end of designing what we're doing, helping us build a spec, as it were. So, one other example I'll throw before turning back to you here is, we think that buildings are going to be just as important as transportation in terms of electrifying the economy. And our utility filed a nearly $700 million application at the end of last year to go install 250,000 heat pumps, right, and help get the cost curve moving in the market. But there again, by tapping into disadvantaged community representatives and low-income community representatives, because by the way, about a third of our residential customers qualify for low-income assistance, so the need is real, right? And these are the folks who are going to benefit the most from the transition, because it ain't just about greenhouse gases, it's also about air quality at a local level. And so, we were able to design that program to also dedicate a lion's share of it towards making not only the heat pump acquisitions, but the upgrades of electrical wiring in those homes targeted at more and more of our low-income and disadvantaged customers and communities of color. So, as you think about your programs, it's the spec, designing inclusion in, but designing your programs so that they're including members, representatives of those communities, because we can't come up with that in our ivory tower.
I love it. I love this so much. And I'm sure you and I would have a great time over dinner. So I'm hoping at some point.
I'll take you up next time I'm in DC. You got it.
Okay, that sounds fabulous. So I want to push a little bit, because you sound like sort of a one-of-a-kind leader. And the thing that I encounter when I talk to leaders is, well, we'll get to the diversity piece once we figure out the technology. We'll get to the diversity piece, once we sort of stand everything up. And you're absolutely saying we've got to do it at the outset. We've got to do it at the foundation. And I'm wondering if you could make the case for your peers, right? What is the rationale for approaching business in the way that you've approached it? And how would you sell this to your colleagues and peers around the country?
I don't think I have to sell it to most of my peers. So I'm vice chair of the Edison Electric Institute, and that's the Trade Association for Investor-Owned Utilities. So we cover about 70% of the people in the country. And I look at my peers, and I think most of them are sharing that same sense, right, in their communities. What diversity means is different in Chicago than it is in LA or New York, but I think the fundamental philosophy is the same. So I'm seeing my peers across the country with that same sense of drive around this. And then let's be honest about it, the conversation in our country changed for the better through a very tough event, right? The George Floyd killing and Breonna Taylor and so many others. I don't know what happened. That sparked a different tone to the discussion. And so, it's not just in the electric sector, but when I'm with colleagues at the Business Roundtable, right, that has like a couple hundred of the CEOs of the largest companies in the US, I'm seeing the same sort of commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But if I had to make the case, it's just good business, because not only does it help us reflect our communities, but it makes the quality of our problem solving better. Because if you have everybody on the job being, I don't know, a kind of dorky former Puerto Rican scientist, who ended up in a power company.
You're among your people. Just know that, like everyone here can relate.
Well, but if everybody were like me, that would not be very diverse.
Got it. We need that diversity of thought. Okay. Thank you so much, Pedro. I appreciate your input there. I want to turn to you, Dr. Alam. Let's pick up where Pedro left off. Why is diversity important?
Yeah, so as a company at STEMLoop, our mission is to unlock the power of biology to sense and respond to the world's challenges, right? These are the world's challenges. These are challenges faced by 99% of the population, not the 1%. And so we need to make sure that we have folks that have lived experiences in populations that are vulnerable to things like climate change or environmental pollution and environmental injustice to actually address the problem effectively. So for us, we believe that diversity and inclusive innovation is critical if we're going to succeed as a company.
I love that. So it's essential to what you're trying to deliver in the world, right? And you can't do that without people who have a lived experience that can be reflected in the work. I'm wondering if you could share with the audience a little bit of some of the things you've been doing to ensure that you have inclusive innovation at your company.
Yeah, so we are, of course, a small startup, right? So we haven't been able to do a ton. But what's really exciting about a startup and what an advantage that we have relative to other organizations is that we don't just walk onto a team. We don't join a team. We don't inherit a team. We build the team that we want, which is really exciting. And if you think about a challenge like, I'm going to make this really simple, like gender diversity, for example. If you have a 60% male workforce and you are at an organization that's 100 people or 1,000 people, to reach parity, you're going to need to hire either 20, 200, 2,000, whatever that amount takes to reach gender parity. For us as a startup, right, if we have 6 men and 4 women, for us to reach gender parity, we have to just hire 2 women. So this is, it's sort of exciting, from my perspective, because we get to build the team that we want, and we are very thoughtful and considerate about making sure that we have a team that represents, the global population and specifically Chicago's population. In terms of things that we have done as an organization, so one thing that we did do was correct a lack of gender diversity that we had early on. Happy to say that every single one of the full-time employees of STEMLoop is coming from an underrepresented background of some sort. The other thing, and this sort of goes back to the earlier question that we've done, is we really do believe that diversity is critical to our success. And so as part of our core values, diversity and innovation are there. And this isn't just window dressing. I feel like, maybe at a larger organization, it's easy for these things to become performative. But in a small startup, right, everybody actually, there's so much, chaos and uncertainty that things like a mission, a vision, and values actually carry a lot of weight when we're trying to figure out what's the right thing to do, who should we be hiring. And because diversity is a core value that we have at STEMLoop, we all keep each other accountable. And every time we're hiring for the next role, for the next position, we're always thinking about what can we do to make sure that we are drawing from the most diverse candidate pool that we can possibly draw from.
Well, so I want to pick up on that thread. And I want to talk about some of the challenges, because I've been around the block a few times. And, one of the things I hear again and again is we can't find fill in the blank, right? That diverse talent, the folks that are going to fill the needs that you have in your organization. So can you talk about your response to that that messaging? Because again, many of us are working in the STEM space and hear that again and again. I think Pedro's answer would be, well, we build it, right? If you can't find it, you build it. But you as a startup founder, right? How do you answer that? And how do you find the talent that you need? And then I want to hear you talk about any other challenges that you have encountered as you've gone about your work.
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is that, the folks are absolutely right. The pipeline sucks, right? And I'm grateful for folks like Pedro that are doing everything they can, and that also includes the Chain Reaction Innovations Program at Argonne, in helping to platform people that are coming from underrepresented communities, because it makes my job easier as a startup founder when we're sourcing talent. Now, given that the pipeline is pretty bad, especially for highly technical scientist and engineering roles, some of the things that we try to do is think outside of the box, right? So hiring from the most prestigious or privileged institutions probably won't net you a diverse workforce, right? Why not reach out to other institutions that may be in your area, look at community colleges, be more creative about how you source candidates, right? Just posting a job on LinkedIn or Indeed.com isn't going to get you there. You have to put in the work to reach these folks where they are, and you have to provide them with the platform to so that they can excel in what they do, right? Because these folks haven't had the privilege of necessarily attending the best schools, landing the best internships, so on and so forth. And so you have to take a chance, and you have to just deeply believe that diversity is going to help you succeed.
I love it. And so you're acknowledging here, some of the structural inequality that exists and the world in which you're operating, but that you're having to do the work to close the gap, and it's paid off for you. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about other challenges you have faced as you stood up your operation.
Yeah, so I think immigration is a huge problem that we've had to face, right? So I wanted to say international talent, like hiring international talent, but the reality is that this is just foreign-born talent that has come to the United States, that has trained in the United States, and it is really difficult for a small organization to hire these people, right? Because we don't have the ability to sponsor, visas in the same way that larger organizations or institutions have. I can't tell you how many candidates that we've screened that we were just absolutely in love with the candidate, right? The skill set that they brought, the experience that they had, the ideas that they were going to bring to the company. And we just couldn't solve this problem of like, well, how do we actually get them to work here in a way that's legally compliant?
Right. That's a great one. And I'm sure it's resonating with other people in the audience. And so I want to leave you two on the stage. I want to turn to my virtual colleagues here, beginning with you, Dr. Slaybaugh. And you're a defector from the academic community. I understand it's a lot more fun over here. But you know, we don't see a lot of women in the investment space. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about kind of being in a minority as an investor.
Yeah, and I realized I didn't say earlier, please call me Rachel. You know, I still new in what is it like to be a minority in this space. I think I don't know. So far, it's actually been a pretty good experience. I feel lucky to be at a firm where I'm, you know, listened to, and I feel like my opinion matters just as much as everybody else's. I'm not talked over in meetings, or I just like don't have those experiences. So it feels like I'm just a full participant. On the other hand, I know that I'm bringing a perspective that is more sort of aware of diversity and sensitive to what some of the things we could do in terms of recruiting and also supporting our companies. So I find I'm more often bringing up like, oh, hey, we visited that company. I noticed there weren't any women there, or I noticed there were only white people there. Or so I think I see it more, and I'm more aware of some of the inequities and some of the challenges around, you know, finding entrepreneurs and helping those entrepreneurs themselves create diverse companies. Yeah. And just more awareness.
I love it. And I think you just identified another superpower, which is your ability to see inequity, right? And that's not something that everyone can see. So I want you to hopefully tuck that away and realize that that is a very unique gift. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about your organization and its approach to ensuring that you're investing in companies that meet the highest standards of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. How are you guys doing that? And what lens are you applying in your investment strategy?
Yeah, great question. So DCVC, as I mentioned, is a deep tech firm. We've been around for about 12 years. We have historically been a seed and Series A fund, so earlier stage, and we're now also doing some later stage growth investment. All of our investments are focused in a does this technology make the world better frame. So some of that is climate tech. We have a pretty big climate tech focus, but also cybersecurity, medical, you know, agriculture, just a variety of let's make the world better using, you know, the investment dollars we get to put to work. So we have a couple of tracks of how we think about diversity. We have a very formal ESG checklist, and this is kind of a, you know, documentation, show our investors that we're doing this. But we have much less formal, but structured in some ways, approaches for finding companies where we go, try to find pitch competitions, track other, you know, pipelines for where there are diverse founders that are usually there, so that we're trying to make sure we have a pipeline where we're getting deal flow of diverse founders. And then once we have a company, we try to help them figure out not only how do they like recruit other diverse leadership into their team, how do they build for themselves hiring practices that builds out diversity into their company, but things like, you know, what are policies they can implement, right? Because these people aren't just developing a technology, they're building a company. So it's like, oh, how do you actually have a parental leave policy that's really good? Or you're building in healthcare, have you thought about including trans rights? You know, some of these, how do you actually not only just do some of the surface work of getting the people in the door, but building the policies to indicate to those people you take this seriously and to support them and keep them there once they're there.
I love it. I love it. So I want to dig a little bit here as well. So in the investment community, the name of the game is risk, right? And risk mitigation in particular. So how do we think about risk and diversity? And you mentioned your own investors, right? So, you have to sort of create a return on investment for the contributors to your own fund, I'm assuming.
Mhm.
So how do we think about risk as we are really at the edge of the diversity, equity, and inclusion frame? And I would say the mirror image of this question is why it matters, right? Like why diversity matters. And maybe you can answer that as well. But how do you think about risk and DEI&A in your role? And how do you talk about that with stakeholders that are very focused on the
Mhm.
performance of your portfolio?
Yeah, so something that has really helped is the profusion of literature that highlights how well diverse teams do. And so the way that we can frame risk is it's not that we're taking a risk on a non-traditional founder, it's that we're taking a risk by not looking for non-traditional founders. It's that the risk of missing out on the vast pool of talent and the innovation that could be happening by only looking in the same places and funding the same people over and over and over again. Um, you know, that's a huge risk. And I think people forget that. And so some of what we can do in this risk framework is, fortunately there's literature out there now to kind of support this thing that you could intuitively figure out and say, we're not taking a risk by doing this, we're taking a risk by not doing it.
I love it. I love it. I just want to capture all of those nuggets of information from you. And thank you so much for sharing that. I could go on and ask you a lot more questions. I'll circle back through all of the panelists at the end, but I want to make sure Ms. Kelly Johnson has a word here. And again, she's the Talent and Diversity Outreach Program Manager at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Kelly, so great to have you be a part of this panel. And I'm sure you're listening in with great interest because talent acquisition is what you do. And I'm wondering how Lawrence Berkeley has responded to this moment. And in particular, what changes has the lab implemented in order to really meet the moment that Pedro mentioned at the outset, which is, this post George Floyd world we're in, where everyone realizes that we've got to grapple with racial inequality, with structural injustice head on.
Yeah, absolutely. We have adopted some new methods or best practices to ensure inclusion and equity are maintained throughout the recruitment process. And one example of that is our Equity Advisors program. So our equity advisors, they help promote fair hiring practices and they raise awareness of implicit bias, to ensure like search committees are operating fairly and inclusively throughout the candidate selection process. So they're specifically trained in appreciative inquiry and collaborative communication strategies that are really geared towards ensuring fair and equitable outcomes. So we consider the equity advisor role like a supplemental role to the recruiter. So very critical to our recruiting process, our search committee process, and holding people accountable, that A in the DEI&A, right?
Yeah. And so Lawrence Berkeley, has the privilege and luxury of being in the Bay Area. I used to live in the Bay Area. I know that, the region itself is very forward leaning on issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. But you're within a broader enterprise, right? So not only are you a part of DOE writ large as a member of our 17 national labs, but you're also a part of a larger cohort of DEI experts across the lab family. How do you talk about DEI&A? And again, thinking about the business case, thinking about all of the sort of rationales for taking it on, how do you talk about it with your colleagues across the lab complex? And here I'm talking about, folks who work in places like Idaho, in New Mexico, all over the country. How do you address issues of DEI&A as you're
Yeah.
thinking through the hardest parts of it with your colleagues?
Great question. So I think it's one of the things you have to be truly authentic and transparent about. And one of the things I find when I do go out, across the country and within the community, people really need great examples of what DEI&A looks like, particularly around the A and accountability, right? I think everyone has an idea of what it is, and it's a checking the box on something, but it's really not. It's really it's really doing the work. It's allyship. It's holding people accountable. It's taking a look at yourself around self-awareness. Like, is my thinking really aligned with, the strategy, the goals, the values of Berkeley Lab? And then if it's not, you have systems here. There are systems here within our lab. There are people here, IDEA program office. There are IDEA committees that are doing this work. There's a lot of ways you can access tools and support to really figure out, am I doing this right? And if I'm not doing this right, how do I go about doing it? So being here in the Bay Area, there's a lot of resources, a lot of people doing this work, a lot of people doing this movement. And one of the things that makes me really proud to be at Berkeley Lab is everyone's doing it. Everyone's attempting to do it. Everyone's not just about checking the box. Everyone's really trying to make an impact for outcome.
Right. I
and
love
that's
that.
really important. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so great to be a part of a community where everyone is headed in the right direction, right? The same direction. And maybe people have different ways of getting there, but we're all,
Yeah.
on the same boat, heading in the same direction. I want to do a lightning round. So 30 seconds for each person to respond, and then we'll turn it back over to the leaders of this program. The question is, have we reached a tipping point in terms of inclusive innovation? And if we haven't, how do we get there? And so I'm going to give everyone about 30 seconds to respond to that. And I'll start with you, Pedro. Are we at the tipping point?
Maybe we're at the tip of the tipping point.
Okay.
Yes, and that the conversation's different, much more work left to do.
Excellent. What about you, Dr. Alam?
Yeah, I would say the same thing as Pedro. I think we're at the start of the tipping point, but we have a lot of work ahead of us.
What do we do? Give me some tips. What do we need to do?
I mean, frankly, what you heard Khalid doing is, and frankly, I think we're trying to do also, start by making sure that we're all engaging employees, partners, stakeholders, community members. Get a real discussion going, and then secondly, be transparent. Be transparent.
I love it. Okay, thank you both so much. Rachel, are we at the tipping point? If so, if not, what do we need to do to get to the tipping point?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like yes, but again, the beginning, and there's a risk of backslide. So some of it is we need to keep pushing forward. I think we're at a place where everyone has this idea that you need to do something about DEI, but not necessarily what that is and how you do it effectively. And so I think that's where there's a lot of space to make sure, okay, we actually really push this forward and get something done.
I love it. Kelly, you get the last word here. Tipping point, yes or no? And if not, how do we get there?
I don't think we're at the tipping point yet. And I agree with Pedro. We're at the tip of the tipping point, and we have so much opportunity. I think this is opportunity, right? And I think relationships, like this work is about relationships and networks and utilizing those relationships to really expand your networks. Learn from the people around you. Learn from those that you haven't, the marginalized groups, because that's important. Yeah.
I love it. That is such a fantastic place to end on. We are going to lock arms and we will do this together. I am so honored to have been a part of this panel, to have been the moderator, and I'm really just thrilled about all the work that all of you are doing in the world. I'm going to turn it back over to John Carlisle, who is waiting in the wings to send us to our next part of the program. So thank you so much. Please, everyone, give our participants a round of applause.
Well, speaking of tipping point, when you run events like this, you have a reception afterward. The smell of the food here in Chicago is wafting into this room. So if I don't finish up really quick, well, I'm going to be in trouble. So again, thank you all for attending the first LEEP Summit. This has been fantastic, very ambitious hybrid event. I think we pulled it off. Hey, for the virtual audience and people here, are you interested in applying to this program, joining this community? Are you someone that's at a university or lab setting anywhere and want to push your innovation out into the real world? Well, visit the websites of the 4 active nodes now in LEEP and learn more, because this fall, when timing's different for the different nodes, we'll take applications for our next cohort. So please, please do that. You can go forward there, Tina. Keep going, keep going. There you go. Big thanks to our many VIP speakers and panelists. Thank you so much. Big thanks to our sponsors. World Business Chicago is sponsoring the reception just now, so that's great, but also Constellation, Exelon, Meaty Foods. We're going to enjoy some Meaty Foods Nashville hot sandwiches. I think that's the smell coming in here. And New Mexico LEEP as well. Hey, big thanks to Joe Cresco, Paul Sires, Chris Oshman at the Advanced Manufacturing Office. They're the program managers that support this program. Big, big thanks to the organizing committees. There's the local committee as well as all the labs and AMO put together. But in particular, Janelle Richmond, who's standing over there. I tell you, man, going from a 300-person event at the Sheraton in 5 weeks or less to what you just saw here is just amazing. She was on point for all of this stuff. And she's probably going to hate me forever, by the way. Big thanks to Resolution Studios and Cut Through. This is Ed and Ian. These are the folks that you don't see in the room here, but they're the ones that really made this such a seamless, pleasant event and such a game changer. I mean, this is hybrid. This is not a Zoom call. Wow. Finally, yeah, I'm almost done, thank goodness. Finally, a big thanks to the real stars of the show, of course, all the innovators in our programs. The future is in your hands. It's been a great honor for me and a pleasure, as for all of us, to help you make your visions a reality. So, wait a minute here. One last thing. So this is John Carlisle signing off from Chicago. We'll see you next year. Yeah.